apparently Bud Light included a transgender woman in their advertising campaign. This was not okay with MAGA Nation. All the country stars are very upset. Kid Rock is shooting at it. Travis Tritt, he took it out of his rider when he's on tour. John Rich, he took it out of his bar in Nashville. Somebody has to explain to these dumbasses the point of being rich and famous is you don't have to drink Bud Light.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, May the 10th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star Spangled Banner, we'll have criminal, terrorism, my take, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, and philosophy, who needs it, chapter 2. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The first lesson of economics is scarcity. There's never enough of anything to satisfy all those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. Thomas Sowell. The tragedy of the political world is that more can be advanced politically by ignoring economic truth than by embracing it. That scarcity is at the heart of economics, and that all allocation of scarce resources involves trade-offs, is one of the rare indisputable laws of economics. And yet in political frameworks, it is explicitly denied to the point of absurdity.
And that was No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So Hugh Hewitt, listening to him, and he says, talking about a place, I assume it's in Israel, by the name of the place, and he said that a terrorist attack happened there. Wrong, Mr. Hewitt. Wrong. As John F. Kennedy noted, things don't just happen. They're made to happen. What he should have said is terrorists struck there. Terrorists committed murder. Perhaps even better is to leave the word terrorists off of it, because terrorists politicize and thereby glorify what it is that these people are doing, when in reality they're nothing but common criminals committing murder. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to Hugh Hewitt, and there's a commercial. And again, commercials can be very telling. But it's actually a public service announcement, and a individual, it sounds like they're a young person. He says, I may have done made some mistakes, and I may have committed some crimes, but I am not a criminal, right? And it sounds good, but it's a fallacy. The fact of the matter is you are a criminal until you've been rehabilitated. And part of rehabilitation, the fundamental part of rehabilitation, is making amends. Have you done what is necessary to repair the damage that you have done to other people? When you've done that, then you can say you've been rehabilitated, and yes, you're no longer a criminal. But until you've gone and done that, until you have made amends, yes, you are. You're still a criminal. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little Stuart Varney with what he calls My Take.
Just come down a bit more soon. As for Bitcoin, still hovering around that same level, $28,200 a coin. That's the markets, and now this. This is just not good enough. The performance of the president is unacceptable. Okay, I know that sounds harsh, but we face multiple crises, and the president is out to lunch. In a few hours, Title 42 will be lifted, and if you watch Fox, you know a huge migrant surge is on the way. What do we get from Biden? Looking frail and tired, he said, quote, it remains to be seen how things work out. Quote, it'll be chaotic for a while. That is a rather casual response to an invasion. He seems to think we're all okay with the mass migration of Central America to North America at our expense. Then there's the budget battle. After a big meeting at the White House Tuesday afternoon, the president said, quote, it is the basic duty of the United States Congress to avoid defaulting on our debt. In other words, the impasse is the fault of the Republican House, and the presidency has nothing to do with it. Just not good enough. And now here comes Hunter. The House Investigating Committee revealed a tangled web of wire transfers which delivered millions of dollars to the president's family. The committee couldn't find a credible business as the source of all that money. It was influence peddling. The White House calls the investigation a political stunt. It's becoming apparent that voters understand the mess we're in, and they understand that the president's response to these crises is just not good enough. An ABC poll found 68%, more than two-thirds, think Biden is too old for a second term. I'll say it again. Sooner or later, senior Democrats will call on the president and tell him it's time to go. Second hour of...
So that was, again, Stuart Varney with all of this. And, of course, I take him with a grain of salt. I don't take him terribly seriously because of, first of all, he likes to chuckle his way through the broadcast. 2 or 3 minutes from now, I'm sure he's going to be yucking it up with one of his guests or one of his staff members. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is because he just can't get things right. He says that Biden's performance is unacceptable, and he borrowed that phrase from the Wall Street Journal, who said the same thing. What does that mean? What does unacceptable mean? Really what he should be doing, could be doing, and should be doing is hammering the promise angle, is saying Joe Biden should not get a second term because he has not kept his promises. He has failed on every one of his promises. He promised to have a secure border, and he failed. He promised to have a good economy. He has failed. He promised that we would have a stable banking system, and he failed. On and on and on. That's what Mr. Varney should be doing. Quit chuckling your way through the broadcast and make sure that our leaders are held accountable. And it's his job because he reaches millions and millions of people. He has some influence. All of the Fox broadcasters have some influence as opposed to you and I, rank and file individuals who have more limited influence. We influence our families, etc. But Stuart Varney has much bigger influence, and he should do better than that. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Mental blackmail. The concept of brainwashing has already led to some legal implications, and these have led to new facets of imagined crime. Because of the reports about communist brainwashing of the prisoners of war in Korea and China were published widely in newspapers, they aroused anxieties among lay people. As mentioned in Chapter 3, several schizophrenics and borderline patients seized upon this rather new concept of brainwashing, using it as an explanation for a peculiar kind of delusion that beset them, the delusion of being influenced. Some of these persons had, as it were, the feeling that their minds had been laid open, as if from the outside, through radio waves or some other mystic communication, thoughts were being directed. During recent years, I received several letters from such patients complaining about their feelings of continued brainwashing. The new concept of political mental coercion fitted into their system of delusions. Several lawyers consulted me for information about clients who wanted to sue their imaginary brainwashers. The same concept, used above to account for pathological suspicions, could be used maliciously to accuse and sue anybody who could professionally give advice to people or try to influence them. At this very moment, fall 1955, several court procedures are going on wherein the defendants are being sued for the crime of brainwashing by a third party. They are accused of having advised, in their professional capacity, somebody to do something against the plaintiff's interests. The shyster lawyer is now able to attack subtle human relationships and turn them into corrupt matter. This is the age-old evil of using empathy, not for sympathy, but for antipathy and attack. And in so doing, the accuser may misuse a man's hesitation to bring these human relationships into the open. The accuser also makes use of the strange situation in the United States that even the innocent winner of a court procedure has to pay the cost of his legal help. Practically, this means that in a difficult judicial question, he has to pay at least $30,000 before he can reach the Supreme Court, if it is a Supreme Court case, and appeal to the highest form of justice in our country. Because of this new angle, which has developed during the past few years of the brainwashing situation, the psychiatric profession has been made more vulnerable to unreasonable attack. In one case, a third party felt hurt by psychological treatment that made the patient more independent in an unpleasant commercial situation in which he had formerly been rather submissive. In another case, the doctor was sued because he was able to free his patient from a submissive love affair and an ambiguous promise of marriage. In the third case, the patient during treatment changed from a commercial agency that had treated him badly. In all those cases, the disappointed party could bring suit on the basis of so-called brainwashing and malicious influence. In several cases of this form of blackmail, an expensive settlement was made out of court because the court procedure would have become far more costly. The practicing psychiatrist who is attacked in this way experiences not only financial pressure imposed on him by the dissatisfied party and a malicious lawyer, but in several states, the court does not even recognize his professional oath of secrecy. The Hippocratic Oath says, "Whatever in connection with my professional practice or not in connection with it, I may see or hear in the lives of men which ought not to be spoken abroad, I will not divulge, as reckoning all that such be kept secret." Some courts hold that only physical investigation and treatment are valid as medical treatment not to be divulged. Personal conversation, the quintessence of psychiatric treatment, is not looked upon as a medical action. Hiding behind professional secrecy is regarded as contempt of court. An additional difficulty is that this accusation of malpractice by a third party, not by the patient himself, is not covered by the usual malpractice insurance. The importance of such perfidious attacks on psychological relationships, however rare the number of cases may be at this moment, is that it opens up the road for many other forms of mental blackmail. It means that subtle personal relationships can be attacked and prosecuted in court merely because a third party feels excluded or neglected or financially damaged. I cannot sue my broker because he gave me wrong financial advice, but I can sue a psychological counselor for malpractice because he brainwashed my client. What new possibilities for mental blackmail and sly accusation are open? Gradually, we can make punishable wrong intention and anticipation, nonconformist advance and guidance, and, in the end, simple honest human influence and originality, things that are already considered criminal in totalitarian countries. The word blackmail was originally used in border warfare between England and Scotland. Blackmail was the agreement made by freebooters not to plunder and molest the farmer in exchange for money or cattle. The word comes from the Middle English mail, meaning speech or rent or tax. The French equivalent, chantage, brings us even nearer to the concept of mental coercion. It means forcing the other fellow to sing, to confess things against his will by means of threatening physical punishment or threatening to reveal a secret. It is, in this last analysis, mental coercion. We may call mental blackmail the growing tendency to overstep human reserve and dignity. It is the tendency to misuse the intimate knowledge of what is going on in the crevices of the soul to injure and embarrass one's fellow man. Mental blackmail starts wherever the presumption of guilt takes place of the presumption of innocence. The hunting up of dirt and sensation in order to embarrass a victim we see very often carried on by the yellow press. It is not only playing up indecency, but at the same time it undermines human judgment and opinion. And by its sensationalism, it precludes and prejudices justice in the courts. What the weak baby accomplishes with its tears and pouting can be done by the whining, querulous accuser with his fantasies about malicious influence and brainwashing. The suicidal patient may exert the same kind of pressure. I am convinced that in the future the Supreme Court has to make rules which will control these new forms of indictment. Yet, the core of the problem is the growing suspicion within man in our era of transition. We blackmail men's minds with too many security measures, with secret files. We blackmail with gossip, with subtle pressures within political pressure groups, with lobbies within lobbies, and even by withholding our friendship. The judge and the jury. What about the people who are called upon to sift truth from falsehood?
And that was Mental Blackmail from The Rape of the Mind. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 2 of the book by Ayn Rand called Philosophy, Who Needs It? And lasts about 30 minutes.
2. Philosophical Detection, 1974. My lecture at West Point was devoted to a brief presentation of an enormous subject, philosophy, who needs it. I covered the essentials, but a more detailed discussion of certain points will be helpful to those who wish to study philosophy, particularly today, because philosophy has been abolished by the two currently fashionable schools, linguistic analysis and existentialism. I say that the best way to study philosophy is to approach it as one approaches a detective story. A detective seeks to discover the truth about a crime. A philosophical detective must seek to determine the truth or falsehood of an abstract system and thus discover whether he is dealing with a great achievement or an intellectual crime. A detective knows what to look for, or what clues to regard as significant. A philosophical detective must remember that all human knowledge has a hierarchical structure. He must learn to distinguish the fundamental from the derivative. And in judging a given philosopher's system, he must look, first and above all else, at its fundamentals. If the foundation does not hold, neither will anything else. In philosophy, the fundamentals are metaphysics and epistemology. On the basis of a knowable universe and of a rational faculty's competence to grasp it, you can define man's proper ethics, politics, and aesthetics. And if you make an error, you retain the means and the frame of reference necessary to correct it. But what will you accomplish if you advocate honesty in ethics, while telling men that there is no such thing as truth, fact, or reality? What will you do if you advocate political freedom on the grounds that you feel it is good, and find yourself confronting an ambitious thug who declares that he feels quite differently? The layman's error in regard to philosophy is the tendency to accept consequences while ignoring their causes, to take the end result of a long sequence of thought as the given, and to regard it as self-evident, or as an irreducible primary, which negates its preconditions. Examples can be seen all around us particularly in politics. There are liberals who want to preserve individual freedom while denying its source, individual rights. There are religious conservatives who claim to advocate capitalism while attacking its root, reason. There are sundry libertarians who plagiarize the objectivist theory of politics while rejecting the metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics on which it rests. That attitude, of course, is not confined to philosophy. Its simplest example is the people who scream that they need more gas and that the oil industry should be taxed out of existence. As a philosophical detective, you must remember that nothing is self-evident except the material of sensory perception, and that an irreducible primary is a fact that cannot be analyzed, i.e., broken into components, or derived from antecedent facts. You must examine your own convictions and any idea or theory you study by asking, is this an irreducible primary? And if not, what does it depend on? You must ask the same question about any answer you obtain until you do come to an irreducible primary. If a given idea contradicts a primary, the idea is false. This process will lead you to the field of metaphysics and epistemology, and you will discover in what way every aspect of man's knowledge depends on that field and stands or falls with it. There is an old fable, which I read in Russian. I do not know whether it exists in English. A pig comes upon an oak tree, devours the acorns strewn on the ground, and when his belly is full, starts digging the soil to undercut the oak tree's roots. A bird perched on a high branch upbraids him, saying, "If you could lift your snoot, you would discover that the acorns grow on this tree." In order to avoid that pig's role in the forest of the intellectual, one must know and protect the metaphysical, epistemological tree that produces the acorns of one's convictions, goals, and desires. And, conversely, one must not gobble up any brightly colored fruit one finds without bothering to discover that it comes from a deadly yew tree. If laymen did more than learn to identify the nature of such fruit and stop munching it or passing it around, they would stop being the victim and the unwary transmission belts of philosophical poison. But a minimal grasp of philosophy is required in order to do it. If an intelligent and honest layman were to translate his implicit common sense rationality, which he takes for granted, into explicit philosophical premises, he would hold that the world he perceives is real. Existence exists. That things are what they are, the law of identity. That reason is the only means of gaining knowledge, and logic is the method of using reason. Assuming this base, let me give you an example of what a philosophical detective would do with some of the catchphrases I cited in Philosophy Who Needs It. It may be true for you, but it's not true for me. What is the meaning of the concept truth? Truth is the recognition of reality. This is known as the correspondence theory of truth. The same thing cannot be true and untrue at the same time and in the same respect. That catchphrase, therefore, means A, that the law of identity is invalid, B, that there is no objectively perceivable reality, only some indeterminate flux which is nothing in particular, i.e., that there is no reality, in which case there can be no such thing as truth, or C, that the two debaters perceive two different universes, in which case no debate is possible. The purpose of the catchphrase is the destruction of objectivity. Don't be so sure. Nobody can be certain of anything. Bertrand Russell's gibberish, on the contrary notwithstanding, that pronouncement includes itself. Therefore, one cannot be sure that one cannot be sure of anything. The pronouncement means that no knowledge of any kind is possible to man, i.e., that man is not conscious. Furthermore, if one tried to accept that catchphrase, one would find that its second part contradicts its first. If nobody can be certain of anything, then everybody can be certain of everything he pleases. Since it cannot be refuted, and he can claim he is not certain he is certain, which is the purpose of that notion. This may be good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. What is a theory? It is a set of abstract principles purporting to be either a correct description of reality or a set of guidelines for man's actions. Correspondence to reality is the standard of value by which one estimates a theory. If a theory is inapplicable to reality, by what standards can it be estimated as good? If one were to accept that notion, it would mean A, that the activity of man's mind is unrelated to reality, B, that the purpose of thinking is neither to acquire knowledge nor to guide man's actions. The purpose of that catchphrase is to invalidate man's conceptual faculty. It's logical, but logic has nothing to do with reality. Logic is the art or skill of non-contradictory identification. Logic has a single law, the law of identity, and its various corollaries. If logic has nothing to do with reality, it means that the law of identity is inapplicable to reality. If so, then, A, things are not what they are. B, things can be and not be the same time in the same respect, i.e., reality is made up of contradictions. If so, by what means did anyone discover it? By illogical means. This last is for sure. The purpose of that notion is crudely obvious. Its actual meaning is not logic has nothing to do with reality, but I, the speaker, have nothing to do with logic or with reality. When people use that catchphrase, they mean either it's logical, but I don't choose to be logical, or it's logical, but people are not logical, they don't think, and I intend to pander to their irrationality. This is a clue to the kind of error, or epistemological sloppiness, that permits the spread of such catchphrases. Most people use them in regard to some concrete particular instance and are not aware of the fact that they are uttering a devastating metaphysical generalization. When they say, it may be true for you, but it's not true for me, they usually mean some optional manner of taste, involving some minor value judgment. The meaning they intend to convey is closer to, you may like it, but I don't. The unchallenged idea that value preferences and emotions are unaccountable primaries is at the root of their statement. And in defense of their failure of introspection, they are recklessly willing to wipe the universe out of existence. When people hear the catchphrase, it may be true yesterday, but it's not true today, they usually think of man-made issues or customs, such as men fought duels yesterday, but not today. Or women wore hoop skirts yesterday, but not today. Or, we're not in the horse and buggy age any longer. The proponents of that catchphrase are seldom innocent, and the examples they give are usually of the above kind. So their victims, who have never discovered the difference between the metaphysical and the man-made, find themselves in helpless bewilderment, unable to refute such conclusions as, freedom was of value yesterday, but not today. Or, work was a human necessity yesterday, but not today. Or, reason was valid yesterday, but not today. Now observe the method I use to analyze those catchphrases. You must attach clear specific meanings to words, i.e., be able to identify their reference in reality. This is a precondition without which neither critical judgment nor thinking of any kind is possible. All philosophical con games count on your using words as vague approximations. You must not take a catchphrase or any abstract statement as if it were approximate. Take it literally. Don't translate it. Don't glamorize it. Don't make the mistake of thinking, as many people do, oh, nobody could possibly mean this, and then proceed to endow it with some whitewashed meaning of your own. Take it straight for what it does say and mean. Instead of dismissing the catchphrase, accept it for a few brief moments. Tell yourself, in effect, if I were to accept it as true, what would follow? This is the best way of unmasking any philosophical fraud. The old saying of plain con men holds true for intellectual ones. You can't cheat an honest man. Intellectual honesty consists in taking ideas seriously. To take ideas seriously means that you intend to live by, to practice, any idea you accept as true. Philosophy provides man with a comprehensive view of life. In order to evaluate it properly, ask yourself what a given theory, if accepted, would do to a human life, starting with your own. Most people would be astonished by this method. They think that abstract thinking must be impersonal, which means that ideas must hold no personal meaning, value, or importance to the thinker. This notion rests on the premise that a personal interest is an agent of distortion. But personal doesn't mean non-objective. It depends on the kind of person you are. If your thinking is determined by your emotions, then you will not be able to judge anything personally or impersonally. But if you are the kind of person who knows that reality is not your enemy, that truth and knowledge are of crucial personal selfish importance to you and to your own life, then the more passionately personal the thinking, the clearer and truer. Would you be willing and able to act daily and consistently on the belief that reality is an illusion? That the things you see around you do not exist? That it makes no difference whether you drive your car down a road or over the edge of an abyss, whether you eat or starve, whether you save the life of a person you love or push him into a blazing fire? It is particularly important to apply this test to any moral theory. Would you be willing and able to act on the belief that altruism is a moral ideal? That you must sacrifice everything you love, seek, own, desire, including your life, for the benefit of any and every stranger? Do not evade such issues by means of self-abasement, by saying, maybe reality is unreal, but I'm not wise enough to transcend my low-grade materialistic bondage. Or, yes, altruism is an ideal, but I'm not good enough to practice it. Self-abasement is not an answer, and it is not a license to apply to others the precepts from which you exempt yourself. It is merely a trap set by the very philosophers you are trying to judge. They have spent a prodigious effort to teach you to assume an unearned guilt. Once you assume it, you pronounce your mind incompetent to judge. You renounce morality, integrity, and thought, and you condemn yourself to the gray fog of the approximate, the uncertain, the uninspiring, the flameless, through which most men drag their lives, which is the purpose of that trap. The acceptance of unearned guilt is a major cause of philosophical passivity. There are other causes and other kinds of guilt which are earned. A major source of man's earned guilt in regard to philosophy, as well as in regard to their own minds and lives, is failure of introspection. Specifically, it is the failure to identify the nature and causes of their emotions. An emotion, as such, tells you nothing about reality, beyond the fact that something makes you feel something. Without a ruthlessly honest commitment to introspection, to the conceptual identification of your inner states, you will not discover what you feel, what arouses the feeling, and whether your feeling is an appropriate response to the facts of reality, or a mistaken response, or a vicious illusion produced by years of self-deception. The men who scorn or dread introspection take their inner states for granted, as an irreducible and irresistible primary, and let their emotions determine their actions. This means that they choose to act without knowing the context, reality, the causes, motives, and the consequences, goals, of their actions. The field of extrospection is based on two cardinal questions. What do I do? And how do I know it? In the field of introspection, the two guiding questions are, what do I feel? And Why do I feel it? Most men can give themselves only some primitive, superficial answers, and they spend their lives struggling with incomprehensible inner conflicts, alternately repressing their emotions and indulging in emotional fits, regretting it, losing control again, rebelling against the mystery of the inner chaos, trying to unravel it, giving up, deciding to feel nothing, and feeling the growing pressure of fear, guilt, self-doubt, which makes the answers progressively harder to find. Since an emotion is experienced as an immediate primary, but is in fact a complex derivative sum, it permits men to practice one of the ugliest of psychological phenomena: rationalization. Rationalization is a cover-up, a process of providing one's emotions with a false identity, of giving them spurious explanations and justifications in order to hide one's motives, not just from others, but primarily from oneself. The price of rationalizing is the hampering, the distortion, and ultimately the destruction of one's cognitive faculty. Rationalization is a process not of perceiving reality, but of attempting to make reality fit one's emotions. Philosophical catchphrases are handy means of rationalization. They are quoted, repeated, and perpetuated in order to justify feelings which men are unwilling to admit. Nobody can be certain of anything is a rationalization for a feeling of envy and hatred toward those who are certain. It may be true for you, but it's not true for me, is a rationalization for one's inability and unwillingness to prove the validity of one's contentions. Nobody is perfect in this world is a rationalization for the desire to continue indulging in one's imperfections, i.e., the desire to escape morality. Nobody can help anything he does is a rationalization for the escape from moral responsibility. It may have been true yesterday, but it's not true today, is a rationalization for the desire to get away with contradictions. Logic has nothing to do with reality, is a crude rationalization for a desire to subordinate reality to one's whims. I can't prove it, but I feel that it's true, is more than a rationalization. It is a description of the process of rationalizing. Men do not accept a catchphrase by a process of thought. They seize upon a catchphrase, any catchphrase, because it fits their emotions. Such men do not judge the truth of a statement by its correspondence to reality. They judge reality by its correspondence to their feelings. If, in the course of philosophical detection, you find yourself at times stopped by the indignantly bewildered question, how could anyone arrive at such nonsense? You will begin to understand it when you discover that evil philosophies are systems of rationalization. The nonsense is never accidental, if you observe what subjects it deals with. The elaborate structures in which it is presented are never purposeless. You may find a grim proof of reality's power in the fact that the most virulently rabid irrationalist senses the derivative nature of emotions and will not proclaim their primacy, their sovereign causelessness, but will seek to justify them as responses to reality. And if reality contradicts them, he will invent another reality, of which they are the humble reflectors, not the rulers. In modern history, the philosophy of Kant is a systematic rationalization of every major psychological vice. The metaphysical inferiority of this world, as a phenomenal world of mere appearances, is a rationalization for the hatred of reality. The notion that reason is unable to perceive reality and deals only with appearances is a rationalization for the hatred of reason. It is also a rationalization for a profound kind of epistemological egalitarianism, which reduces reason to equality with the futile puttering of idealistic dreamers. The metaphysical superiority of the noumenal world is a rationalization for the supremacy of emotions, which are thus given the power to know the unknowable by ineffable means. The complaint that man can perceive things only through his own consciousness, not through any other kinds of consciousness, is a rationalization for the most profound type of second-handedness ever confessed in print. It is the whine of a man tortured by perceptual concern with what others think, and by inability to decide which others he should conform to. The wish to perceive things in themselves, unprocessed by any consciousness, is a rationalization for the wish to escape the effort and responsibility of cognition by means of the automatic omniscience a whim worshipper ascribes to his emotions. The moral imperative of the duty to sacrifice oneself to duty, a sacrifice without beneficiaries, is a gross rationalization for the image and soul of an austere ascetic monk who winks at you with an obscenely sadistic pleasure, the pleasure of breaking man's spirit, ambition, success, self-esteem, and enjoyment of life on earth, etc. These are just some of the highlights. Observe that the history of philosophy reproduces, in slow motion, on a macro-cosmic screen, the workings of ideas in an individual man's mind. A man who has accepted false premises is free to reject them, but until and unless he does, they do not lie still in his mind. They grow without his conscious participation and reach their ultimate logical conclusions. A similar process takes place in a culture. If the false premises of an influential philosopher are not challenged, generations of his followers, acting as the culture's subconscious, milk them down to their ultimate consequences. Since Kant substituted the collective for the objective, in the form of categories, collectively creating a phenomenal world, the next step was the philosophy of Hegel, which is a rationalization for subjectivism, for the power lust of an ambitious elite who would create a noumenal, non-material world by means of establishing the brute force of an absolute state in the phenomenal material one. Since those outside the elite could not be counted upon to obey or accept such a future, the next sidestep was pragmatism, which is a rationalization for the concrete-bound range of the moment anti-conceptual mentalities that long for liberation from principles and future. Today there is the philosophy of linguistic analysis, which is a rationalization for men who are able to focus on single words, but unable to integrate them into sentences, paragraphs, or philosophical systems, yet who wish to be philosophers. And there is the philosophy of existentialism, which discards the politeness of rationalization, takes Kant straight, and proclaims the supremacy of emotions in an unknowable, incomprehensible, inexplicable, nauseating non-world. Observe that in spite of their differences, altruism is the untouched, unchallenged common denominator in the ethics of all these philosophies. It is the single richest source of rationalizations. A morality that cannot be practiced is an unlimited cover for any practice. Altruism is the rationalization for the mass slaughter in Soviet Russia, for the legalized looting in the welfare state, for the power lust of politicians seeking to serve the common good, for the concept of a common good, for envy, hatred, malice, brutality, for the arson, robbery, hijacking, kidnapping, murder perpetrated by the selfless advocates of sundry collectivist causes, for sacrifice, and more sacrifice, and an infinity of sacrificial victims. When a theory achieves nothing but the opposite of its alleged goals, yet its advocates remain undeterred, you may be certain that it is not a conviction or an ideal, but a rationalization. Philosophical rationalizations are not always easy to detect. Some of them are so complex that an innocent man may be taken in and paralyzed by intellectual confusion. At their first encounter with modern philosophy, many people make the mistake of dropping it and running, with the thought, I know it's false, but I can't prove it. I know something's wrong here, but I can't waste my time and effort trying to untangle it. Here's the danger of such a policy. You might forget all about Kant's categories and his noumenal world, but someday, under the pressure of facing some painfully difficult choice, when you feel tempted to evade the responsibility or to make a dishonest decision, when you need all of your inner strength, confidence, and courage, you will find yourself thinking, how do I know what's true? Nobody knows it. Nobody can be certain of anything. This is all Kant wanted of you. A thinker like Kant doesn't want you to agree with him. All he wants is that you give him the benefit of the doubt. He knows that your own subconscious does the rest. What he dreads is your conscious mind. Once you understand the meaning of his theories, they lose their power to threaten you, like a Halloween mask in bright sunlight. One further suggestion: if you undertake the task of philosophical detection, drop the dangerous little catchphrase which advises you to keep an open mind. This is a very ambiguous term, as demonstrated by a man who once accused a famous politician of having a wide open mind. That term is an anti-concept. It is usually taken to mean an objective, unbiased approach to ideas, but it is used as a call for perpetual skepticism, for holding no firm convictions, and granting plausibility to anything. A closed mind is usually taken to mean the attitude of a man impervious to ideas, arguments, facts, and logic, who clings stubbornly to some mixture of unwarranted assumptions, fashionable catchphrases, tribal prejudices, and emotions. But this is not a closed mind. It is a passive one. It is a mind that has dispensed with, or never acquired, the practice of thinking or judging, and feels threatened by any request to consider anything. What objectivity and the study of philosophy require is not an open mind, but an active mind. A mind able and eagerly willing to examine ideas, but to examine them critically. An active mind does not grant equal status to truth and falsehood. It does not remain floating forever in a stagnant vacuum of neutrality and uncertainty. By assuming the responsibility of judgment, it reaches firm convictions and holds to them. Since it is able to prove its convictions, an active mind achieves an unassailable certainty in confrontations with assailants, a certainty untainted by spots of blind faith, approximation, evasion, and fear. If you keep an active mind, you will discover, assuming that you started with common sense, rationality, that every challenge you examine will strengthen your convictions, that the conscious, reasoned rejection of false theories will help you to clarify and amplify the true ones, that your ideological enemies will make you invulnerable by providing countless demonstrations of their own impotence. No, you will not have to keep your mind eternally open to the task of examining every new variant of the same old falsehoods. You will discover that they are variants or attacks on certain philosophical essentials, and that the entire gigantic battle of philosophy and of human history revolves around the upholding or the destruction of these essentials. You will learn to recognize at a glance a given theory's stand on these essentials, and to reject the attacks without lengthy consideration, because you will know and will be able to prove in what way any given attack, old or new, is made of contradictions and stolen concepts. The stolen concept fallacy, first identified by Ayn-Rand, is the fallacy of using a concept while denying the validity of its genetic roots, i.e., of an earlier concept on which it logically depends. I will list these essentials for your future reference, but do not attempt the shortcut of accepting them on faith, or as semi-grasped approximations and floating abstractions. That would be a fundamental contradiction, and it would not work. The essentials are, in metaphysics, the law of identity; in epistemology, the supremacy of reason; in ethics, rational egoism; in politics, individual rights, i.e., capitalism. In aesthetics, metaphysical values. If you reach the day when these essentials become your absolutes, you will have entered Atlantis, at least psychologically, which is a precondition for the possibility ever to enter it existentially.
And that was Chapter 2 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? And I've got some commentary coming up a little bit later. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.